Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining the Adobe session today. I'm Kathy Scabetta with Adobe, thrilled to introduce you guys to a man whose work I've admired greatly, having discovered him in the Lightroom app. Oops, sorry. I was hearing myself. That's never good. With us his name is Kostas Millas, and he is an art director and a graphic designer and a passionate food photographer based in London. And I think you're going to find his work interesting, inspiring, and probably is going to make you a little bit hungry. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kostas so that he can enlighten us. If you have any questions, throw them in the Q&A area and we'll make sure that we get them answered. So enjoy the next hour with this great speaker that we have.
Oh, thank you, Kathy. Hi, everybody. I hope everyone's well. Thanks to Adobe and Photo Plus for asking me to do this. I'm honored, and hopefully it'll be useful for everyone. So I'm going to take you through, I'll just quickly share my screen. I'm going to take you guys through first a bit of a presentation about me, about my work. It's called Smartphone Food Photography and Lightroom Editing as a nutshell. So the first part of the presentation will be taking you through some tips about me, tips about food photography. I'll show you some of my work and some behind the scenes to kind of hopefully, for you to understand how I create my work. And then towards the end of the presentation, there'll be a chance for questions, as Kathy said. And then I'm going to share my iPad screen and take you through some live editing. And hopefully we'll get through a couple of images together live, and then you can hopefully ask some questions about that as well. So a little bit about me to start. So as Kathy just introduced, I'm a graphic designer and art director by day, but I do food photography and food styling and recipe developing. It kind of started as a hobby and is now sort of side hustle, part job to go alongside my graphic design work. And I shoot solely with a smartphone. Currently, I'll never say never to using a DSLR, but at the minute, the smartphone works for me. And what's great about what I hopefully can do for you guys in this presentation is show that you don't really need a lot of expensive equipment, because I don't have any. I shoot at home. I move furniture out of the way in my living room and in different places of the house to find the right light. So I shoot mainly with natural light, but I occasionally, being as I have a day job, also shoot with artificial continuous light, particularly at night time or during the winter times in the UK where there just isn't any good light. And I'll show you some of that again as the presentation goes on. So being a designer, being quite a visual person, I'm really drawn to color and texture, particularly those two things in particular are something I'm always looking for in shots that inspire me, and also in what the work I want to create as well, be it the dishes or be it the props or be it the backdrops. They're things that I just naturally sort of gravitate towards. And hopefully I'll show you how I pick those out in editing as well. But then the main thing for me is just to kind of make food look delicious and to jump out of your screens, because ultimately that's what a good food shot should do. It should make you really want to kind of, pick up a fork and kind of dig in really. And that's the kind of food photography that I really like, which is why color and texture is so important. So without further ado then, I'm going to start straight in with my ultimate top tip. And this isn't just for someone who uses a smartphone. This for me is for kind of any photographer, because you can have the most expensive equipment. You could have, be the most talented stylist and the most amazing chef, but ultimately you need to get to know your light. And that's something I've really understood over the past year in particular. So I've been doing this for about 3 or 4 years now, but during the pandemic, the fact that we've been at home so long, with me doing my day job, I've had to do it from home rather than the design studio that I normally work in. It's actually given me the chance to see the light in my house throughout the year, because we've been here for a year now, throughout the day, how it changes, how it behaves in different rooms, different windows, based on the direction to the sun. And it's been fascinating. And I think that's something that's really a piece of advice that I'd give to anybody, whether they've got, an expensive camera or just a phone. It's the most important thing for me to get a great shot. So shooting with natural light, let me tell you a little bit about that for me. So like I said, I've really started to understand how the light behaves in my home and in different places of the, in different rooms and different places, because as the sun sort of rises and sets, it changes depending on where it's falling in the house. And that will happen for any person. So, you know, really look at the windows and the areas you've got in your own home to see how the light behaves. So I'll give you some examples. So this shot, for example, was obviously a Christmas themed shot. And this I took in wintertime when the light obviously isn't great. But that didn't really matter for this because I wasn't after any sort of harsh sunlight or any kind of really bright effects to kind of make it feel summery. So this was actually shot at the back of my house. And the back of my house doesn't get direct sunlight at any time of day. So the light is naturally quite diffused, which means we just get quite nice soft shadows and even light coating. So it was really good for this type of flat lay to get a really nice even light source. And that's just a big open window, nothing special, the backdrop kind of positioned straight on, and just a direct flat lay. And again, edited in Lightroom. But then the opposite of that, so this is the front of my house and this is in my living room. So breakfast in the living room. And this window has got Georgian bars on it as well, which for me can be a beautiful feature. So you can kind of see them shadowed across here, which I thought was a beautiful way of framing and kind of getting this element in here. But you can see the difference in the shadow here, like really pronounced deep shadows, really making the color kind of pop. So it's kind of quite a summery breakfast that I wanted to capture. So that light was really made that scene come to life. And also playing with glass as well, like you get some really lovely effects when you can use direct sunlight. And then also this one kind of makes me laugh because this is in my hallway. And this was something I shot quite recently, sort of really beautiful springtime sun for this sort of afternoon tea scene. And this light actually is coming from these windows in the doorway, which are privacy glass. So they're naturally dappled and they create this really lovely sort of almost like sun shining through a tree. And that's something, again, I'd never noticed because when I'm at work, that light is in the day, like I don't really see that. Whereas now I kind of can see where the light behaves and where it changes and it dances around different places of the house. So this was a really lovely and easy scene to shoot to kind of make the most of kind of getting the glistens on the jam and those highlights on the egg wash scones. So that's just 3 examples of kind of me setting up all around the house. So my next tip really would be to practice how best to use the light for what you're shooting. And I'll give you an example. So let's go back to my living room and excuse the dirty windows. This was taken when I was having some work done, so they're covered in dust. But this again was a really sunny day. And I wanted to create a breakfast scene. So this scene is quite similar, you know, in terms of what the actual hero is, the yogurt and granola and fruit, very similar to that one I just showed you guys. But this is a different angle now. And it doesn't necessarily work in every kind of setup in the same way. So the color's different in this one. The bowl is different. And obviously I'm shooting 3/4 rather than a flat lay. So you can see here, the shadows are quite, they're quite domineering in this shot. And frankly, quite ugly for me. There's a lot of shadow in the bowl covering the actual hero. And you can see one of the Georgian bars going across the plate there, which again is not really the intention I was going for, to kind of create that really lovely, relaxed, soft, quite an analogous color scheme. So kind of everything's kind of reds and pinks. So a really quick hack from me, again, not having expensive equipment, taping some white tissue to the window. That will naturally give you, you know, the job of what a diffuser would do. So I don't personally own a diffuser because I just use, you know, what I have, and it's really quick, it's really easy. The neighbors probably think I'm crazy, but it gets the shot I need. So you can see the difference if I flick from these shadows down here to how beautifully diffused they become in this scene. And what's great about shooting here rather than shooting at the back of the house is I still get the strength of that light, whereas I can just control it better. So instead of that kind of winter diffused light, this is still the bright sun coming through to kind of make this a really lovely summery scene, but the light is much more in my control now. So that's definitely something I would really invite everyone to do, to understand, so you can tell that story, so you can really make sure your hero is being given the sort of the stage it needs to kind of sing. So that's a bit about natural light. And then shooting with artificial light. So I use a continuous light softbox. So this ultimately will do the exact job of what I just described to you guys with the tissue paper. So this naturally has a diffusion over the large bulb that's within the softbox, and that will give a really nice, consistent and diffused light. So both these shots, and we're going to edit this shot together in a second, they're all shot with that light. And what I always try to do with that is, because I'm shooting with both light sources, I want to make sure, when they're on my Instagram feed, that there's a consistency there. So no one's thinking, oh, they feel very different because the light source is different. So what I do with this light is position it quite straight on and quite close to my subject. And by having it straight on, that's almost creating the same effect of that straight on window and the sun shining through. So that's something that's worth playing with. Like, I don't often have it angled or kind of pointing over the subject, because that's not going to give me the shadows and the detail and the highlights that I want to create. And also, if you're lighting above, then you're not necessarily going to get the shadows on your actual subjects on the plate of food, particularly on a flat lay. It's going to make it quite flat, and it potentially could overexpose what's going on in the details here. So that's a bit about artificial light as well. And the next thing for me with all food photography is to try and tell a story with what you're doing. So I kind of just touched on that with the sort of summer scene and the breakfast, and then sort of more wintry light of those Christmas pies at the beginning. And you can start to do that more with propping and colors and detail as well. So let me give you a few examples. So this was a shot that I actually did for a client commission recently. And the brand was a potato brand. So naturally, their brief to me was to make sure the potatoes are the hero of whatever I was shooting for them. And they didn't ask for any process shots. They wanted a final scene and a recipe. And this was actually shot a few months ago. It was in January. And they wanted me to develop a recipe using their potatoes, but in a slightly healthy way, with that kind of new year, new you way of thinking, and kind of something healthy, but something tasty and wholesome. So I came up with this sort of winter niçoise salad, using roasted potatoes rather than the boiled salad potatoes you get in the summer. And you can see, so what I wanted to do here was the potatoes of the brand that have got red skins. So I really wanted to kind of bring that out in the color scheme, so kind of using the pink cloth and the pink plates. And you can see here, so I kind of put them in the shot as well. They were happy for me not to use packaging in the shot, which was great for me to create a more natural scene. But, having them in there, having the knife, having them chopped, having them whole, it tells a story of, what the hero is, and it kind of leads your eye into the main plate. And I also made sure, this was a salmon salad. And salmon naturally would be the hero ingredient if you were plating it just normally for your own dinner, whereas the potatoes need to be the hero. So instead of putting a large fillet of salmon on there, I flaked the salmon through the potatoes, through the leaves, and kind of contrasted the green alongside that. And little details like, the egg, again, is quite bold in the frame. It's got that really bright color, and it definitely grabs your attention. But putting it to the side meant, the potatoes still kind of complete that plate and make sure that, you're not missing that detail. And definitely I'd invite people again as well, when you're if you've got a client job or something that you just commissioned for yourself, think about the process, because the process can be just as beautiful as the final piece for me. So like I said, I wasn't asked to do these shots, but I just thought it was a really nice way of, for me, documenting that story and practicing, with raw produce, with cooked produce before it's been styled on a plate, and then ultimately the final piece as well. So it just helps tell that story, A, for your client, but also for yourself. And another series that I've done recently, which I'm really proud of, is something I did. A couple of these went into a competition as well. But this was my rhubarb story, which is it's technically a vegetable, but we use it it's generally used as a fruit in British cooking. And then I really wanted to push myself again to kind of think about a limited color palette, because it's kind of mainly red and black or pink and black. And again, to focus on every part of that journey. So from the raw ingredient, kind of really honing in on that to kind of, celebrate it as a beautiful product. And then the process of making. I love to bake, and I'm not saying you need to be an incredible baker to kind of get these shots, because it's just about playing and looking at shapes and color and texture and seeing how they can tell a story. And even this image, for example, this is kind of quite similar to what I was doing with the potatoes. I never had an intention to shoot this shot, and actually ended up being one of my favorites because these are actually the offcuts, because I didn't want to waste any of the ingredients. You can see the shots, the cuts here as I was kind of cutting the rounds out. I roasted those and just thought, they'll be fine for a breakfast another day. But actually, it was beautiful, and it ended up being one of my favorite shots in the whole series. So kind of keep looking, keep shooting, and keep practicing. So I think you can kind of, even this just straight out the oven, or this just about to go in the oven, it can still be beautiful just by playing with crops and angles and color, really, because when it all gets edited together, it can become a really nice series. So that's kind of a bit about me. I can talk about this kind of stuff for hours, but obviously I want to make sure you guys have got time to ask questions. And obviously we want to get onto the editing as well. So feel free to fire any questions over to me for what I've just shown you.
We have one question that's Bobby asked, what is the light that is behind your softbox? Is it continuous?
It is continuous. Yeah, it's one bulb, and it stays as one brightness. And it was a really affordable. It was just from Amazon. It was literally, I think, about $50 for you guys, or 30. I think it was like 35 British pounds. So again, really affordable. It's really simple, and it's just one big bulb. I hope that helped. I'm not that technical with those kind of things.
And then Evelyn asked if you use a tripod.
I actually don't. At the minute, I don't. It's something I've been looking into recently, mainly because I'd like to start to play with more hands in frame, or maybe even try some kind of stop frame shots as well of me kind of styling the scene. But I've not actually found one that kind of works, particularly for overhead. So if anyone's got any recommendations for me, then feel free to let me know. But at the minute, I shoot handheld, which gives me a lot of flexibility as well, because I can kind of move around the scene and change angle and zoom in, zoom out, depending on what I want to do. I'm quite instinctive as a creative, so that kind of works for me. So I don't have to kind of set up and kind of then decide something's not working and then move everything to kind of then try something different, which I think is the beauty of using a smartphone.
Thank you very much for that. And
Okay.
Someone asked, what phone do you use? They missed the beginning and weren't sure what kind of phone you're using to do your photographs.
I didn't actually say that, so apologies. Yeah, I currently use a iPhone 8 Plus, which is a dual lens camera. So it has a wide angle lens, which is good for shooting flat lays, and it also has the kind of equivalent of a telephoto lens, which is what I use for when you use to shoot portrait mode, which is something on an iPhone. So that's great for the 3/4 length shots, like the pink breakfast scene that I showed you guys. I would actually say as well, if it's helpful, I'm considering upgrading to a new iPhone potentially. But one thing I'm quite mindful of, I want to actually try, is the difference between the iPhone 12 and the 12 Pro, because the new iPhones have, the dual lens iPhones actually have two wide angle lenses. They have a wide angle and then an ultra wide angle, which I'm a little bit skeptical of, particularly for food photography, because that will naturally start to create distortion in your scenes. So that's definitely something I would recommend people be mindful of. Whereas the 12 Pro, I understand, have three lenses, one of which is the sort of equivalent to a telephoto. So I think that would probably be better for someone who's looking to shoot food with a smartphone.
All right. And do you use any external lenses with the iPhone, or is it just straight using the iPhone?
Yeah, straight from the iPhone, and I just use the native camera as part of the. So I don't shoot in any other programs or anything. I just shoot with the camera.
All right, I think it's time to show us some editing. Thanks.
Great. Okay. Let me stop sharing and I will share my iPad. Okay. Can you guys see that okay?
Looks good.
Yeah, great. Okay. So I'm just going to really quickly turn off the photo info. Okay. So let's start with this one of pasta. Okay, so this is something, so people who follow me on Instagram, this is a little sort of obsession. I'm quite a pasta fiend. I really like pasta as a dish, particularly for a lot of the things I cook, sort of the mid meals. But I find them beautiful as actual shapes. I've got so many different pasta shapes in my pantry, and these I've got a series of shots, and this is the most recent one that I've taken. I've just shooting the dry pasta because I just think it's beautiful. And as I showed you guys, this was shot with artificial light, and this was for me all about texture and all about color. Completely monochromatic. It's all, you know, kind of the yellow shade of the pasta, and really wanted to kind of have those pools of light. It's orecchietti pasta, which is called, it translates to little ears. And for me, they're almost like little bowls as well. So they capture sauce, but I think they capture light really beautifully as well. So I'll take you through kind of what I would normally do for my editing. So I'd always start with light. That would be something I always would go to first. And this for me, because I kind of really want to focus on that texture and that detail, I want to bring the shadows out. So I'd naturally go towards the shadows and just dial them up a little bit, just to kind of accentuate. So you can see if you go up or down, so obviously that starts to become a bit flat. So if we go down in the shadows, it just makes it a little bit more intense. And you can also do that with the blacks. Now the blacks will affect the color in the whole shot, but naturally, again, if the shot is quite monochromatic and you've got dark shadows, it would just accentuate those even more. I always like to hold down just to see where I was and where I am now. Oh, one thing I should have said to you guys before as well, apologies. I always go to optics first as well. So when I mentioned about the wide angle lenses just a second ago, something you can do just to help correct that is if you click enable lens corrections in optics, you'll see it just kind of pushes everything up a bit. If I just turn that off and on again, and it just balances out any distortion that your camera lens will have on your photo. So that's worth considering. So let me go back to light. And again, this one, because I want it to be quite contrasty, I want the shadows to be quite deep. I'm going to increase the contrast as well. And again, you can see that kind of what effect that has on the shot as I go up and down. So I'm not going to take it too far, just a hint, just to kind of make it, again, a little bit darker, a little bit more pronounced in the shadows. I'm not going to affect exposure. I'll look at highlights and white after I've affected color. So I'm going to close that menu and then go to my color menu. And then this is kind of where we can affect white balance, which is through the temperature and the tint. So this is obviously quite a yellow shot overall. But one thing I do find with natural light is that with artificial light, is that it can be a little bit yellower than natural light. So sometimes I would look to drop the temperature ever so slightly towards the blue, and it could be very minimal. But the main thing I always like to do in my color work is click on this button here in the corner to actually isolate the colors and get the color mix going. So this is obviously all about monochrome. So we're going to look at the orange and the yellow. So I'm going to start with the yellow being the main color. Now this for me at the minute is starting to look, it's still a little bit gray. And I want to kind of have that, because this is bronze dyed pasta as well. So I kind of want to bring that color out a little bit more. So I'm just going to move the slider of the hue towards the orange slightly. And you can see again, if I just kind of go up and down slowly, you can see it just starts to get that slightly more bronzed, slightly more pink feel, which I think is much nicer. And I personally always like my shots, because I mentioned about color, there's always quite a lot of saturation, a lot of brightness in my photos. So I'm just going to up the saturation ever so slightly to kind of bring a little bit of brightness in there. And now you'll notice because I didn't affect the highlights and the whites in the light earlier, That's because I wanted to play with the luminance first. So this is kind of where we can affect the amount of light going into that individual color. So if I bring the luminance up, again, you can see it brightens all of those highlights. But the thing to be mindful of is not take it too far, so you're actually overexposed in certain areas. So I'm just going to go a little bit there just to kind of bring that out. So that's the yellow. And let's go to the orange. And I'm going to do the same. So I'm just going to bring it down a little bit again towards the red, just to kind of get that slightly more bronze hue in there, rather than it being like an overly yellow image. And again, just a hint of saturation, just to bring that up again a little bit more. Let me check if we need a bit of luminance as well, or whether we're happy to kind of keep it. Because again, if you go darker, it kind of makes it look a bit flat. So it's just a hint that we need to kind of bring that up there. Yeah, I think that works well. Okay, and there isn't any other colors kind of in the mix, but I'll show you how to use the others in my other shot. So let me close that. And I'm just going to go back to light and see whether we can just push the highlights a little bit. So if I'm just going to kind of point your eye to sort of this particular piece of pastel here that's got quite a lot of light on it. So if I make that higher, you can see it just leaves a bit of detail, but I think we can go a little bit just to kind of make that light look like it's really bouncing off those ones that are kind of on the top of the pile. Okay. Now I mentioned I also really like texture in my shots, and you can see there's a lot of texture in the shapes, particularly sort of on the underside of the orchidea. So let's go into effects. Now I'm going to increase the texture here, because that you'll be able to see. Again, I'm going to go all the way just so you can see how far it goes, but you can see everything just comes alive a little bit more. And if I take it really down, you can see everything goes really flat and really soft. So I'm going to increase it. I'm going to take it sort of to 30, 35. Let's go to 40. And you can just see the light really kind of captures those beautiful details. Now, another thing that you can do with that is clarity. So that, again, if we increase that, that will also do the same. But what clarity does, and I'd be mindful of this because you never want to kind of push it too far, is it kind of gives a bit of a posterized effect to everything, because it increases the shadows and all the detail around everything as well. So I wouldn't want to take it too far. This is definitely too far. But just, again, a hint of it would just bring out those shadows and those sort of deep light effects that we wanted to achieve with the previous editing of the light. So I think that's looking good. Now, a shot like this, with it being one subject and there's nothing else for you to kind of look at really apart from, those individual shapes, there's details in here that I would go through and then use the healing brushes to start to just refine those details and get rid of any unsightly marks. So I'm just going to zoom in and show you the kind of thing I mean. So like, for example, here, this white, oh, sorry, let me just undo that. This white blob here is a bit unsightly. The black spot next to it is also a bit unsightly. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to reduce my brush. And you can either drag and kind of cover a whole area to mask, or what's really good for things like this, for just small specks, is if you just kind of click on, it would then roughly kind of take an area very similarly around that area, and it would just sort of color it in basically for you to kind of get rid of any unsightly marks. So if I again do this one here, I'm just going to bring that down just so it's closer to the area, just so it doesn't look like it's from an area of the image that isn't relevant. I'm going to click done. So that just starts to clear away those bits that are a bit unsightly, and there's quite a few in the image really. There's a few down here as well. I'll clear a few more just to show you guys. Now this here, this black spot, now where that's kind of positioned itself, that doesn't really seem right because there's a natural line there in the shape of the pasta. So I'm just going to move that up, and you can see the line starts to come into the shot, and then I can let go, which is much more natural, and I get rid of the bit I didn't want. So again, I'm going to do this one here and just bring that round so it's a bit more natural to the space. And I'm just going to make it a bit smaller by brush size. Okay, and click done. And then one more just to show you guys. this one up here. I'm just going to bring that around again because it actually captured another spot that I didn't want. Okay. And that's a really simple, I mean, I'd go through and mark, you know, there's quite a few, you know, you can see there's quite a few marks here that I'll get rid of, but just so I can, you know, give you guys an understanding of what I would do in a shot like this. Hopefully that's helpful. Any questions on this one?
Yeah, were you, is this a JPEG image or a RAW image?
So when you shoot on, so my iPhone currently shoots a JPEG. Does it shoot RAW? I know Apple, I think, are thinking of, I'm not sure if they've done it yet with their new phone, but I think there is modes to shoot RAW in newer phones.
That is true. And in the Lightroom app, if you shoot with that camera, you can also shoot RAW. And just a note to people that editing in this Lightroom mobile app that Costas is showing can absolutely handle JPEGs and RAW images.
Great. Was there any other questions on that one?
There are not, so keep going.
Okay, great. Right then, so that's quite a simple simple edit. The next one I have for you is this image. And what I liked about this image in particular is it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier in terms of like practicing, and you don't need to be an amazing chef to kind of capture food. So this was a weeknight meal. It's a very humble dish. It's, you know, it's not a kind of Michelin starred or anything super impressive. Or you know, I did mention I was a keen baker, but again, I would like to just cook humble food as well. That is just tasty and easy to make. And this is what I really wanted to capture with this dish. So what I really wanted to kind of show you guys in this in particular is texture and color. Because you've got a lot of different things going on here. You've got a textured backdrop, you've got crusty bread, you've got soft fish, and you've got a really kind of very soft textured stew as well. So all of those things need to be balanced to kind of bring out all the details of those things. So let's make a start again. So let's start with the optics, as I said before, and I'm just going to enable lens correction, which again, you can just see that little bit of detail bringing out the distortion. Okay, and then we'll go back to light where we start as before. So again, I'm going to go to contrast. And what I normally do, I normally start in light and I will do an initial edit here. But then again, like I did in the previous one, I will go into the individual colors and adjust as I need to. And what I'm going to show you in this edit as well, I'm going to show you some selective editing where we can isolate the plate and the bread and kind of focus the edit specifically on those things. So let's bring the contrast up a little bit because we want to kind of boost those colors. And then also this has got some quite pronounced shadows as well. It's quite a sort of moody evening scene. So I'm going to bring the shadows down a little bit to kind of make them a bit darker. Now, pay attention to the plate, obviously, because that's getting darker as well, but that's that's what we can then adjust in the selective edit shortly. And I'm just going to do the blacks. I'm going to move the blacks up slightly because I think the shadows are dark enough, but if I move the blacks up, that just helps us to bring some of the color back into the stew. Now this, I can play with the highlights a little bit. I'm going to pay close attention to the fish though. Again, if I go too far, the fish starts to kind of become a bit too overexposed, but I do want to bring out that white. So I'm going to just go, maybe 30 is enough. Okay, so we'll go back to light if we need to. So let's go to color. Now the main colors in this shot are obviously reds and oranges in the stew and in the bread, but there's also, you know, part of my styling was to kind of bring in these spring onions and the herbs because they add a natural contrast to those colors. So that hint of green will just pop against that complementary red. So Let's play with the temperature. Do we need to bring it down? Do we need to make it a bit cooler? Yeah, I think we do. I think that kind of helps make the white of the plate kind of stand out. And I'm just going to up the vibrance, play with that a little bit. You can see how that starts to affect the colors. Again, I'm just going to go at a hint. We don't want it to kind of look too much. Let's play with the saturation as well. Does that take it too far? Again, just a hint might be enough. Okay, so now we're going to go back to the color mix, because that's the area that I really like to focus my attention on. And let's start with red, because that is kind of the bulk of our dish, the main color of our scene. So at the minute it's quite orangey, so I'm going to just see, do we want to go down to make it more red, or do we want to kind of bring it up to go towards more orange? I think we want to go a bit more red to kind of bring out that tomato color. So let's take it down to about 20. And again, if we just hover over, we can see where we were and where we are. So originally, image overall was a little bit yellower. We've gone a bit cooler now, and we're upping the reds in the shot. Okay, so let's play with the saturation there as well. So let's see how that goes. So yeah, I think that can take a bit more. So it goes plus 20. And then this is where, again, where the luminance can come in. So this is a backlit shot. So you can see the light sources from the top and the shadows are at the bottom. So let's bring the luminance up and see, notice the area at the top of the stew just starts to increase the light source there, which I think can take it. Let's go up to 50. I think it can take it because we've got the lovely highlights at the top of the image there that we start to accentuate. Okay, now let's play with the orange. So again, we've already, this whole stew is obviously covered in this tomato sauce. So the beans are kind of orange, but they're still part of that red palette. So I'm going to move the slider down towards the red as well. Just a hint, I don't want to go too far. Just to kind of bring those, all those colors together. I'm not going to play too much with saturation. I don't think it needs it on this one. I'm just going to see. No, I don't think it needs any saturation. So if I double click that, it goes back to 0. But I am going to play with the luminance. Again, I want to pay attention to that top of the bowl to see if I can bring some of that detail out. And you can see it just brightens everything in that color tone. Okay. Now, also going to play with the yellow, because there's some yellow in the scene as well. So this is mainly, if you pay attention to the bread, this is kind of where this gets affected, and also in the fish as well. So we don't want to take it too far. We definitely don't want to go towards green, because that will make it look unnatural. But if we slide over towards the orange, it just makes it a touch warmer, and just brings out a little bit more detail in that golden crust of the bread. So again, let's play with saturation. Do we need any more saturation there? Or should we bring it down? I think it does need a hint just to kind of bring that warmth in there. Okay. And let's see if we need any lumens. Now pay close attention to the fish here. So if I bring it down, obviously it's affecting the bread as well, but you can see what it does to the white of the fish, because it's got yellow tones in there. So I'm just going to take it up a touch just to make that a bit brighter. And again, let's press down and see where we were and where we are now. Okay, so look, I think I'm happy with that. So let's play with the green. Now, green is a funny color to play with, particularly in food, because it's really easy to make it look unnatural. We just want to bring out a hint of freshness here, because these are, the green elements in the shot are garnishes that have been put on fresh. They're not part of the cooking, so they can kind of have that slightly more saturated color, but again, we want it to look fresh, we want it to look natural. So let's play with the hue. If we go down towards yellow, it kind of starts to disappear. So we're going to take it towards the slightly cooler end of the green, just to bring them up slightly. And you can see it just elevates it and to contrast it from that red. A hint of saturation, just to kind of bring out that bright green of the spring onions. And again, a little bit of luminance will just increase the highlight on those little specks of ingredients over the stew. Okay, so that's a kind of overall color edit. But what we're going to do now is also play with effects. So in the previous image, I increased the texture and I increased the clarity to kind of really bring out that detail in those pasta shapes. Whereas in this image, we've got a lot more going on here. So we need to balance that a little bit more. So personally, the backdrop texture, I at the minute find a little bit distracting. So what I want to do is bring the texture down overall in the shot, just a little. And you can see that just knocks back those details in the backdrop. And it's obviously doing it to the whole image, but we'll address that in a second. So I just want to play with clarity as well. So again, if I bring it up, that brings some of that detail back, but it doesn't affect the background too much because I've adjusted the texture. In fact, we could probably go down a touch more on that just to balance those two themes. So they work really well together, texture and clarity. So it's always good to kind of pair them together and see how one affects the other. Okay, so that's effects. So that kind of gives us a general cleanup of the shot and an overall edit of color. But I'm still not really happy with how that main plate is looking. I still think it looks a bit dark. I still think we could kind of bring those details up. So I'm going to take you guys to this tool, which is the selective edits. And you'll see the plus in the corner, this blue plus. If you click on that, there's a number of different options here, and I'm going to show you a couple of them. So I'm going to use the radial edit first, which basically you can just click and drag on the image, and it will draw a radial shape, which is perfect for flat lays of plates. So I'm going to drag that over to my plate, and you can see this. You can see how it's got a red finish over that radial filter. Now, if you want to affect that, see at the minute I've got it quite diffused, which is great because it means it's not going to give me a hard effect on what I'm editing. I'm just increasing that slightly so it does affect the plate. Not too much though, because I don't want it to kind of go out of that plate. So if you want to affect that though, to make it more precise, the button here, the feather button, if you click on that and you slide up, you will see it becomes more or less diffused. If I go down, you see it starts to become much more solid as a shape. Now, I don't really want it to be like that because that's going to give me a very hard line. So I'm going to go back up to, let's say 50% will be enough just to give us that diffused edge, which will be enough. Okay, so now we get a specific selective edits menu. So these are kind of similar to what we had before, but there's slightly less options, but we can do very similar things to what we did to the whole image, but just to that isolated area that we've now selected with the this radial filter. So let's go back to light. Now on this, because these are quite deep plates, naturally there's going to be shadows created from the plate. And I don't want to get rid of those, but I'm just going to increase the exposure ever so slightly. Again, paying close attention to the fish because I don't want to overexpose that and wash out the white. But again, I'm just going to go really far so you can see the difference it makes just to that area. But if I just go back down, can you just be like plus 50 is enough just to give that a little lift. So if I just click done, and I'm just going to click undo, just so you can see that difference straight away, and then redo. So it just makes that whole dish come to life. But I'm not finished there, so I'm just going to go back to that. So I'll click on my selective edits again, and you'll see there's a grey circle in the middle of my plate. So if I click on that, it means I can select that filter again. So let's go back to light. And I'm just going to decrease the shadows slightly, again, just to brighten everything ever so slightly and give it all a lift. And I'm also, because I mentioned before, we didn't affect highlights too much before, now we can affect them just for this. So I'm just going to bring that up again a little bit. So if I go too far, you can see what it does to the fish. So I'm going to just do a little bit, plus 15, just to lift everything up there. So that's enough on light. I'm pretty happy with the color, so I'm not really going to go back into color. And you can't affect the colors individually here. You can only affect them from a white balance point of view. So that's one thing to note. If you want to affect colors specifically in different parts of your shot, it's best to do them first, and then you can edit other more specific things afterwards. Okay, but I am going to go into effects again. So we touched on texture at the beginning and the differences within this scene. So this stew for me could still probably look a bit softer. So I'm going to take the texture down just to kind of make the beans look a bit softer, a bit more unctuous as a dish. But I am going to increase the clarity ever so slightly, again, just to kind of yin and yang and balance those two things together. Pay close attention to the fillet of fish and the peppercorns that I kind of cracked over the top. So if I increase the clarity, it just brings those details out. Again, if I go too far, you'll see how far it goes on the dish. But just a hint again to kind of balance those two things just brings everything up. I could probably decrease the texture slightly more just to soften. Okay. I'm pretty happy with that, I think. So now I've done that plate, but I haven't done anything on the other plate. And because they're in line together, the way I've styled them, you know, they're in the exact same light source. So a really easy thing to do is to select your edit. If you click and hold down, you'll get a menu. So I'm going to duplicate my radial edit, and then it's like a copy and paste. So I'm just going to zoom out slightly, and I'm going to bring that radial filter over to my other plate. And then I know that that has got the same effect, the same light effect as the rest of the image. Okay, so I'm happy with that. And my one last thing that I want to do with this one is look at the bread. So the bread for me now, because it's been part of the backdrop ultimately, it's lost a bit of its texture. It doesn't feel as sort of freshly baked and as crusty as I'd like it to. So I'm going to go back to my selective edits, but instead of using a radial filter, I'm going to use the brush, which is the first one here. And you can do, you can affect this in the same way that I just showed you in terms of the feathering or the strength of the brush. So I'm going to click on this top button here, and you can see at the minute, this increases the size if I go up and down. So I'm just going to make it quite small for the minute to allow me to do the detail I need. And then the middle one here, the middle circle affects the feathering again. So if I go down, it will make it much more solid because it reduces the feathering. It becomes a solid circle. And if I go up, it becomes much more feathered, which again, I think if I keep it at 50%, that will probably be a nice balance. Okay. The third circle there affects opacity, but I'm going to leave it at 100% opacity for now. So I've got my brush. And what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to zoom in slightly. Oops, sorry, I'm going to do that. Okay, and I'm going to brush over. Oops, let me just set my brush again. Apologies. I'm going to brush over the bread, and you can see it's starting to get that red filter just to show you where you're potentially going to be affecting this part of your image. So I'm going to affect all the bread. And again, I've kept it feathered just so it doesn't give me like a hard edge, which will look odd against the backdrop or the plate. And don't worry if you overlap something by accident. Like if I overlap that plate, for example, down here, you can erase that. I'll show you that in a second. So I'm just going to go over this little bit here that's been torn into the bowl. Okay, I'm just going to go to my eraser. So you can see there's a brush and an eraser in the top corner. So I'll click on the eraser, and the eraser will keep the same effects as your brush. So if you've got a feather on there, that will keep it on the eraser as well. So I'm just going to brush lightly, and you can see the red starts to disappear from that rim of the plate. So it can just affect, I'm only affecting the bread, not the plate, which is what I want. Okay, so let's go back to our colour. Now the bread, I want to be a little bit more golden, so I'm going to just put a touch more yellow into that, and also a touch more magenta, because that will just make that orange golden crust come to life. And then I'm going to go back into effects, and I'm going to increase the texture and the clarity, because I want that to look really crusty and really fresh. So up goes the texture, and just a hint of clarity as well. And I think if I just zoom out and just click before and after, it's a subtle edit, but it really helps bring everything and all those details to life. Any questions about that one?
We have a number of great questions, and we have about 10 minutes left. So
Okay,
let's just fire through some questions. Carmine asked how the relatively low resolution works if you're like doing a magazine shoot with these, if this is ultimately to be a kind of a high-res photo.
It's a good question. I think obviously if you're shooting with a smartphone, the quality of the smartphone, particularly like if I was using a newer phone, it would have more megapixels and be slightly more quality than a lesser grade phone. It's never going to be the same quality as a mirrorless or a DSLR camera. That's just the nature of smartphone food photography. I personally always tell people if they've asked me to do something for them, I'll say to them, just so you're aware, I shoot on a smartphone. Where are you hoping to use this image? So you're not going to be able to do a billboard, for example. But again, I think the main thing comes down to the light. If you've got good light, your phone will behave in a very different way than if you've got poor light. And to be honest, I think if you've got good light and your phone is of decent quality, I think you should still be okay for a magazine or a book if it's not printed too large. But it's something that's always worth testing and checking with whoever's doing the repro.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I have seen other professional shoots done entirely with a phone, so we know it's possible.
I remember actually Bon Appetit magazine did a whole issue all shot with a phone to kind of really focus on that popularity of smartphone food photography. So it can be done.
All right, next question. How long does it take you to shoot one dish?
Oh, it depends. Completely depends on what I'm shooting. This one in particular, not very long really, because it all depends on what I'm trying to create. So this one is a very humble and honest, and like I said, a midweek dish. So this was probably kind of taken and edited within an hour or two really. Whereas other dishes, if I'm doing a bigger scene, I actually shot something today, which is like a whole tabletop scene with lots of different plates, glasses, details, dips, all that kind of stuff. And that takes a lot longer and will take a lot longer to edit because you need to make sure each of the individual elements are edited correctly and kind of everything is brought to life. So it's a bit of, that question's kind of how long is a piece of string really. So, you saw like that the pasta one was quite easy because it's one subject. I mean, I would go in and make sure that all those little details and specks are removed. So that would take time. But it really does depend on the dish. And what I always like to do when I'm cooking or preparing something, I like to make sure I've styled as much as I can and tested the shot before I start to bring the food into the scene. So this shot, for example, I played with the plates. I played with, where do I want a knife and fork to go? I made sure the bread was kind of ready before the dish so I could kind of tear it and see where I want it to go. So there's something I would always invite people to do to kind of make sure, particularly for a dish like this, that's a hot dish, you don't want to kind of start to wilt and start to lose its and start to look unappetizing. So try and prep as much as you can before you start cooking, just so you're not stressed and kind of rushing around. But yeah, it does vary. So sorry, I can't give you a proper answer, a definitive answer to that.
No, I think that's a legitimate answer. I mean, I think it's going to make, you know, the corollary to that is how long does it take you to edit one dish? And I suspect that's equally
Yeah,
dependent upon your light, how the shoot went, et cetera, all over the map.
definitely. Yeah, and you can see, and that's why I chose these two shots, because this one naturally, even just during the seminar, took me longer. And I generally spend longer myself. You know, there'll be details I'd want to go in and make sure, you know, things are refined. Like for example, there's a couple of specks on this backdrop. You know, the down by the spoon, there's a dark spot that I'd get rid of. You know, things like that. You know, I like to look and kind of make sure everything's perfect. But yeah, it will depend on how much is in the frame.
All right. In your setups, what are your backgrounds? Are they homemade? Or do you have tiles? Are you using cloth? How do you come up with your backdrops?
So the backdrops, pretty much I'd say 90% of my backdrops are from a company called Woodrow Studios, which are based in the UK. And they're all handmade, and they're really beautiful wooden painted backdrops, and they're all sealed. So you can spill things on them and kind of, you know, put drips and stuff on them, and they don't kind of lose their finish really. And I really like using them. But I also like just to use fabric as well. So the one I shot for that client was just on a piece of pink linen, just to kind of get again texture in there. I used to use tiles when I first started, before I, you know, even invested in any backdrops. I just went to a hardware store and just bought some, you know, big sort of half-meter tiles and just started playing around with those. But I know lots of people kind of just buy tester pots of paint, and some wood, and just kind of start to create their own backdrops. So there's so many ways of doing it really. Or even just if you've got a nice wooden tabletop, then you can, you know, as long as that's in a good light source, you can experiment with that as well.
All righty, thank you.
Okay.
Can you describe your workflow from capture? So what happened from the time you shot the image until you started editing?
Um, could you elaborate? What do you mean by that? So once it's been shot, kind of, is there anything in between me shooting and editing?
Correct. Well, you're shooting in your phone, right? So the image is already in your phone. How are you
Yeah.
getting the image into Lightroom on your phone and then to an iPad?
Right. So I'm obviously got an Adobe account, and I've got my iPad and my iPhone synced on the cloud. So my photos will automatically kind of sync between the two. And sometimes I edit straight on my phone. You know, if I'm in a rush, if I've had a long day at work and I just want to capture something quickly, I'm more than happy to edit in the actual mobile version. I wanted to show you guys this one in the iPad, just because it's a bigger screen. It's a slightly bigger interface for me to, you know, do the tutorial on really. But yeah, there isn't a lot to kind of get from one to the other really. It's kind of shoot. I'd go through all my selects and kind of pick my favorite, and then go straight into editing. I hope
We
that
just have
answers
a
the
couple
question.
minutes left. Can you do me a favor and scroll over to library, and just so people can see that plus icon on how you would import a photo from your camera roll? It won't work. You know, you probably don't have a lot on your camera roll on your iPad, but I at least want to show them that. Okay, so guys,
So
see down at the bottom right corner, you see that little
yeah,
picture of a photo with a plus. You'd click on that,
yeah,
and he's clicking, and you can add a photo from the camera roll, etc. And that's how you
exactly.
get the photo from your native camera phone, your native camera app in your phone into Lightroom. Or you can shoot in the Lightroom app, and we're going to talk to Costas about that because it's a great app. Any other questions? All righty. Thank you so much, all of you, for attending and giving us an hour of your day. If you want to rewatch any of this, it's available at this same link, and you can rewatch the video as much as you want. Costas, thank you very much for spending time with us today and enlightening us on your techniques. Your work is beautiful. I'm
Thank
hungry.
you.
Um, and thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Hope it was helpful.
It was. Thank